Chapter 8:21 Killing the King of the Enemy Kingdom. The night winds blowing from all directions in Eventide World were fiercer than the night winds blowing on Earth, when Xietain was forced to open a portal to draw away the danger of the nuclear missile launched by Xianyuan Wentian. Although the temperature was not as low compared to Earth thanks to the fact that it was not snowing in Eventide World, the ferocity of the wind in Eventide World was enough to restrict the movements and speed of the soul evolvers. At the same time, because the winds were blowing so strongly, smells traveled farther, dispersed faster, and were perceived with greater clarity. Today, in the middle of the cold night, the smell of blood enveloped the northeastern lands of the Gale's kingdom. Die! Bastard! Arg! Roars of rage and bloodlust, swears directed at the hated one, cries of pain and wailing. The lands 4 kilometers short of the border between the Gale's kingdom and the Xietain kingdom, within the territory of Gales, were filled with human voices at the same time as magic explosions were accompanied by the unmistakable sound of swords clashing with swords. Surrender and you will survive. Throw down your weapons and kneel. Join us to fight the demons. On the other hand, the soldiers that made up the army formed by the troops of the Crap Kingdom defeated by the Gale's kingdom and the Gale's kingdom itself pushed forward fiercely as they demanded the surrender of their enemies as if victory was in their hands. A little over 40 minutes had passed since the Gale's kingdom troops charged towards the enemy camp with the intention of igniting a night war. However, the Xietain kingdom had clearly made preparations as when they approached all the soldiers were already up and armed ready for war. Even then, even though the unclassified soldiers and the first-order soldiers of the Xietain kingdom were fighting with ferocity, the second-order soul evolvers were not able to bring out their 100%, so the generals of the allied army were managing to push them back while inflicting continuous wounds with each passing minute. As for the reason why the second-order generals were not able to give their 100%, it was very simple: fear. No. More than fear, they were terrified as they occasionally peered at the most violent battlefield where 3 existences had been clashing fiercely and viciously for almost an hour. Rumble. After a powerful explosion that shook the earth and made the sky rumble, Xietain and his 2 enemies staggered back more than 100 meters from each other. Their feet slid loudly across the ground leaving cracks all along the way before they finally regained the capacity to control their bodies. The king of the Xietain kingdom looked at the young man in front of him with wide eyes, shock visible in his trembling pupils. His chest was rising and falling heavily, his deep blue armor was cracked in several places and through those cracks could be seen as more and more red blood slowly dripped down. Who the hell are you? King Logan exclaimed, feeling persistent fear. It's impossible for someone like you to have gone unnoticed for so many years. Are you a demon general in disguise? The bastards of Gale sure are vicious. King Logan of the Xietain kingdom had been fighting the young soul evolver in front of him while teaming up with the king of the Xietain kingdom, who was also a soul evolver above level 150. However, to the further disbelief and fear of the 2 kingdom kings, the young soul evolver who seemed to still be in the first order managed to fight both of them as equals at the same time and cause them considerable damage. The king of the Xietain kingdom looked at Xietain with a frown and a hint of wariness and fear shone in his eyes. To think that even Shadow Killer would be killed by you. Looks like that old man with the surname D. Gales didn't go as crazy as it seemed when he sent letters to all the human kingdoms of the world demanding unconditional surrender. The king of Xietain said as he panted, his left arm hanging to the side as several bones had been fractured after being hit by the enemy's greatsword. Xietain wiped the trace of blood on the corner of his lips as he looked at King Logan and said in an indifferent voice, "Demon? I have killed some demons, all of them had violet blood. But you can think whatever you please, you will not live beyond tonight with your stubbornness." Without waiting for a reply, he looked at the king of the Xietain kingdom and said in a cold voice, "I have to say that I didn't expect to meet another kingdom king in this place. However, that is good news as well. It will be quicker for us to crush Xietan's resistance once their king falls under the blade of my sword." The Xietain kingdom was considerably far from Gales, bordered to the north of the Xietain kingdom, but it took 3 or 4 days of continuous travel to reach the borders unless one had flying mounts with high agility such as the diurnal bats of the royal family of the Gales kingdom, or one was a third-order soul evolver agility and stamina type. The king of the Xietain kingdom frowned as he heard the words of the young enemy in front of him and a flash of hesitation shone in his gaze. He had advanced first to the Xietain kingdom while the troops of his kingdom were advancing south in this same direction. After a talk with the king of Xietain, the 2 came to a mutual agreement to fight against the enemy forces without underestimating them. After all, they both knew that Philip D. Gales was not a man who acted on impulse, and since he had dared to do what he did it was very likely that he had a great trump card hidden from view. In the end, the 2 kings spent a large amount of high-quality soul stones to hire Shadow Killer. The two kings thought they were exaggerating a bit, but at least the victory would be theirs. The king of Dacia was even relieved as his kingdom would suffer minimal casualties once they reached the border with Gales. However, it turned out in the end that the enemy proved to be ridiculously powerful to the point that even the legendary Shadow Killer lost his life tonight and in record time. Felix, don't tell me you're really planning on submitting? King Logan shouted upon seeing the change of expression on the Dacia king's face. Before the Dacia king could say anything, Bizemon's voice sent chills down the bones of both kings. It wouldn't be a bad idea if you surrender too, King of Xietain. At least you won't lose as much as you think you will. Poe. King Logan spat on the ground and said loudly, I, Logan Xietain, was the prince in whom my father the former king trusted to pass the throne of the kingdom to and with it the responsibility of protecting the people. You want me to surrender before a barbarian as you? Don't be so arrogant, boy. When the other kingdoms get united, all that will be left of Gales will be ashes among which will be yours. Bizemon looked at him coldly for a few seconds before shaking his head and stopping paying attention to him. The words of the king of the Xietain kingdom might sound very beautiful and righteous, but Bizemon was far from being the same ordinary college student who knew nothing about life enough to be bamboozled by words like that. After having seen all kinds of expressions and experiencing firsthand how trashy human beings could be, Bizemon came to understand that people like the king in front of him just wanted to maintain their status so they could stupidly shout I am a kingdom king, and thus be able to maintain their stupid so-called honor. Instead, he looked at the king of the Dacia kingdom and said with an outstretched hand forward, Felix de Dacia, I have read the information that King Philip has provided me about you. A powerful soul evolver with skills focused on assassination and whose intelligence is worthy of a true scholar. With your capacity to see the big picture, you should have realized that no matter what the two of you do, you cannot defeat me. Persistent opposition will not only cause your death but will also bring pain and suffering to your family, while the lives of many soul evolvers who out of loyalty to you will oppose me will be lost. The king of Dacia looked at the outstretched hand of the young man in front of him, a clear gesture of invitation and suggestion. It was unquestionable that the overall power of the other side was terrifying. Even with the union of Felix himself and King Logan, two soul evolvers above level 150, all they could do was fight almost on equal footing as physical wounds were slowly accumulating on their bodies due to how terrifying and heavy the enemy's attacks and his giant weapon were. However, the king of Dacia needed to confirm something before deciding what to do. First of all, I need you to answer me something honestly, King Felix said as he jumped to the left and put some distance from King Logan. Zeman ignored the change of expression on the Xietain Kingdom king's face and nodded towards the Dacia king. If he could get a third-order powerhouse to join them, it would make many things easier. After all, the king of Dacia was a soul evolver whose power was comparable to that of a demon general. What is your real goal? I know Gales is taking advantage of what happened in the mountain behind the castle of the kingdom to accuse all the kingdoms as traitors of the human race. It is probable that some princes or kingdoms have allied with the demon race, but you can't expect me to believe that all kingdoms did so when I, king of one of those kingdoms, is in front of you. The king of Dacia narrowed his eyes and stared at the young man in front of him. He was confident to see through any lies thanks to his 400 years as king. However, the king of Dacia did not need to worry. Bizemon had no intention of lying at all, as such a thing was not necessary in the face of existences obviously weaker than him. My goal is to unite all the kingdoms of the human race under a single kingdom, Bizemon said with a clear voice and sincere eyes. In his heart, he added, and begin to cement the future path I will walk. Seeing no trace of lie in the other party's expression, the king of Dacia narrowed his eyes even more and slowly said, that would make the king of Gales turn into the supreme existence of the whole world. But, I don't understand something. What do you have to gain from all this? Is the royal family of Gales being secretly manipulated and controlled by you? After a moment of silence, Bizemon said honestly, I am not controlling the royal family of this kingdom. However, it could be said that in a sense I am manipulating the king to achieve my own goals. To be honest, I cannot tell you my goal as you will not believe it anyway. However, what I can guarantee is that the king of Gales and the two princesses will receive millions of times more benefits in the future for helping me complete my goal. This is something that will take at least a few years, but I promise that all humans in this world will see a great improvement in their lives. Of course, those who will benefit the most will be those who have helped me when help was required. Obtaining the blueprints and formulas, as well as the knowledge that this world had accumulated, was actually a small part of all that Bizemon planned to get. His ultimate goal was so big that even Lilith was slightly surprised when she found out, and it was all thanks to the mutation that the skill lightning movement had undergone after evolving following Bizemon's consumption of the seeds of the treasure plant. In reality, Bizemon was gambling. This was a big gamble. Success and failure depended on many factors other than strength and intelligence, among them, luck would play a big role. The king of Dacia stared at Xietain for several seconds, and even though the other party's answer was clearly meant to hide many things, the king did not feel that the young man was lying to him when he spoke regarding benefits or the fact that he had no evil intentions. I have one more question for you. Go ahead. Xietain nodded again and waited patiently as he kept his attention on King Logan, who seemed to be thinking of running away as he realized that things were not going well for him. What do you plan to do with the demon race? The king of Dacia asked with narrowed eyes. Even though the human race is partially united, the separation of kingdoms and politics are two things that cause an abysmal crack between us. These are things that weaken us as a race. The demons will definitely not allow the entire human race to unite under one banner. Of course, I am aware of that. Xietain nodded calmly. The gaze in his eyes became even colder than it already was as he slowly said, if the demons stay in their territories without causing trouble, then so be it. I don't discriminate especially by race but by general attitudes that I see for myself. However, if demons dare to stand in my way, I'll be sure to crush them until they can't get back on their feet. Ha! You sure talk big for someone who doesn't know how terrifying the demon lord is. The king of the Xietain kingdom sneered with beads of sweat pouring down his increasingly pale face. The constant blood loss and anxiety were worsening his condition rapidly with each passing second. Xietain gave him a sidelong glance and scoffed. The so-called demon lord couldn't even stop Shadow Killer from escaping from him, but I killed Shadow Killer in less than 10 minutes. King Logan's expression changed for the worse upon hearing Xietan's words. However, he did not have time to say anything as even his thoughts were interrupted by the cold voice of the young enemy before him. Besides, dead men don't talk. Strength in exchange for agility. Swoosh! The two kings saw a golden light flashing before them. However, when the eyes of both became clear, all they saw was Xietain in his previous position upright, except that all around him was a golden light halo covering his figure. Even the crimson-colored lightning flashes that crackled around his body had turned to bright gold now. In his right hand, the dagger that formerly belonged to Shadow Killer released a faint purple radiance under the moonlight and starlight. The king of Dacia turned his head stiffly and his eyes trembled fiercely as he mumbled, "El Logan, you." The king of the Xietain kingdom frowned slightly and subconsciously held his hand to his chest as he felt a great deal of pain transmitting directly to his brain. However, what he touched was his cracked armor, something that confused him greatly. To his surprise, however, when King Logan tried to say something, it didn't take him long to realize that he couldn't speak, and just 2 or 3 seconds later he collapsed with a thud on the ground, without even knowing how he had died. Really? People who don't understand their position even after being beaten up really are interesting. I don't understand how this kind of existence managed to survive for so long. Xietain shook his head with an indifferent expression on his face, as if what he had just killed was not one of the 49 most powerful humans in the world but a cockroach. The king of Dacia looked at the young soul evolver in front of him in shock. Even though he knew that the other party was probably hiding something, what Felix de Dacia didn't expect was that the power difference between the two sides would be this overwhelming. Chapter 822 Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. The king of the Dacia kingdom looked at the yellow-colored orb on the ground and subconsciously gulped. Magic-grade treasure orbs represented a magic treasure. Such treasures were very valuable and highly esteemed by all living beings in the world. However, Felix de Dacia did not dare to move to pick up the treasure orb. King of Dacia, join us. Xietain extended his hand again as the effect of the second activation overlap regeneration lingered. I don't ask much of you or your kingdom, only cooperation when it comes to facing my enemies. You will be able to keep your private property, honor, prestige, position, everything. In the future, everything you have today will be multiplied tenfold. The king of Dacia stood silently looking at the outstretched hand in a sign of invitation before finally sighing. He raised his head and all animosity disappeared from his eyes as he said in a clear voice, "And if I say no?" Xietan's expression did not change as he said without hiding anything at all, "If you refuse my invitation then you will have to die. And if I told you that I am willing to return to Dacia and order my troops that are on their way here to retreat? I will not interfere in whatever you and Gales have in mind to do." King Felix said after a moment of silence. Hee. Xietain let out a chuckle in amusement and raised his eyebrows as he looked at King Felix with an amused expression on his face. Even though the young man in front of him did not say any clear words, his expression spoke enough as it seemed to say, "Do you perhaps treat me like a 3-year-old? The existence of the Dacia king and the Dacia kingdom was not a threat to Xietain at the moment, however, that was just now and things could be different in the future. Xietain had gotten to where he was from the lowest point possible, an ordinary citizen without any real power. All the hardships he was forced to go through made him learn that in order to live a second longer it was necessary not to underestimate the opponents, but above all, not to leave possible future threats alive. The king of the Xietain kingdom sighed and finally nodded. All right, I agree to join you to support you in your fight together with the Gale's kingdom. Xietain smiled slightly and lowered his outstretched hand. His eyes narrowed to a slit, and with a slight tinge of murderous intent, he slowly said, King of Xietain, I will not use my skill to make you my follower as that would take away a good deal of your power. However, let me give you a friendly warning. If you dare even think of betraying me, you better succeed. Because if you fail, I swear to you on my loved ones that I will make you regret ever being born and you will wish for death as life will be hell for you. The expression on King Felix de Xietan's face changed slightly as he perceived the murderous intent in Xietan's voice, and even though his words sounded like a threat, the king somehow managed to figure out that it was a warning and true advice. The king of the Xietain kingdom straightened his back and brought his right hand to his heart as he said in a deep voice, I, Felix de Xietain, swear in the name of the Xietain royal family that as long as you, Xietain, do nothing to harm the overall interests of my kingdom, I, Felix de Xietain, will never try to stab you in the back. Xietain nodded, temporarily satisfied with things as they were. The reason why he didn't use loyal follower on the king of Xietain was very simple. Since Xietain was in a world that wasn't his home world, he needed powerful manpower. And if King Felix fell under the effect of loyal follower, his power would drop to the point where a general demon would be able to defeat him in a normal battle. Besides, even if he wanted to, it wasn't like he could really use loyal follower on all the kings in the world since there weren't enough slots. Patience. I'll have time to put a leash on them all. Xietan's eyes glistened strangely as he moved forward to pick up the dead king's belongings as well as the treasure orb. After finishing stripping King Logan's corpse of what was once his belongings and picking up the yellow treasure orb, Xietain cut off his head before standing up. Your Majesty Felix, let's put an end to the Xietain kingdom's resistance. Xietain smiled slightly before turning into a gust of wind, heading towards the larger battlefield several kilometers distance away. King Felix for some reason felt uncomfortable hearing someone who had literally subdued him by force referring to him as Your Majesty. I don't know why, but I feel like this brat is making fun of this old man. Felix de Xietain sighed before following in Xietan's footsteps, disappearing in seconds in the direction of the northern horizon. With the fall of King Logan, the soul evolvers that composed the army of the Xietain kingdom completely lost all will to fight. Although there were two generals who upon seeing the king's head being lifted up by the enemy became enraged, that fury cooled down just like a flame that had a bucket of ice water thrown over it after seeing the king of the Xietain kingdom obediently standing behind the enemy leader like a little minion. A few hours later, and by the time dawn finally came, inside the main tent, Xietain was listening to the report of one of the soldiers regarding the losses and gains over the war that had just ended. A total of 47,782 men of our original army lost their lives during the past 2 days of the war against the Xietain kingdom. At the same time, a total of 7,251 soul evolvers from the Crap kingdom died during the past 24 hours, said the soldier before turning to the next page and continuing. Among the 55,033 fallen men, 4,206 were first-order existences while the rest were all at level 25 or below, and we haven't lost any of our second-order soul evolvers. Xietain listened with his eyes closed as the soldier paused for a moment before continuing. We have killed over 126,000 enemies including 2 generals, one of them having been killed by yourself and the key point that marked our rise to victory. Although the count is still ongoing, approximately 460,000 men who were part of the main army of the Xietain kingdom have surrendered while approximately 100,000 managed to flee northwards taking advantage of the turmoil. General Bai, should we chase after them? Even if we can't hunt them all down, I'm sure we'll be able to find several of them. However, Xietain shook his head and waved a hand. Forget it, there's no point in doing something like that. Those who ran did so because they did not possess the ability to threaten us. Our power will only grow from now on, so they will be even less of a threat in the future. This was not underestimation, it was self-confidence. Xietain was confident that when it came to growth speed, there was no one able to compare to him. Therefore, if an enemy was not able to defeat him today, then they would definitely not be able to defeat him tomorrow. The soldier nodded and continued, as for treasures and skill scrolls. Xietain listened to the soldier for several minutes, and after ordering him not to touch the treasure orbs above the rare grade, orange color, he simply dismissed him. Nai he. He rubbed his hands together and while laughing like an old hag pulled a few things out of his storage ring when he was finally left alone and in peace. A dagger, several glowing stones, a thick tree branch surrounded by a strange pale green aura, a skill scroll, and a deep blue sword. The sword and some of the soul stones were looted from King Logan's corpse while the rest had been taken by Xietain after he defeated and killed Shadow Killer. Why are you smiling like that? It's creepy just like your expression. Lilith appeared to his right, sitting directly on the edge of the table while moving her feet back and forth in an extremely cute manner. Xietain gave her a sidelong glance and said with a serious expression on his face, Lilith, just as we men don't understand many things about you women will never be able to understand the love that every man of culture feels when we look over the spoils of war. Man of culture? Lilith blinked before realizing something. She rolled her eyes and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, again, it's one of the codes that appear in your light novels that you love so much, isn't it? Humph. Xietain snorted softly before silently starting to count the number of soul stones. Not long after he started, his eyes lit up as he said with a big smile on his handsome face, ha ha ha. This daddy has become rich overnight. As expected, killing high-level soul evolvers really is good stuff. He nodded in satisfaction. Lilith observed how happy Xietain had become as he counted a little over 21 third-order soul stones joining Shadow Killer and King Logan's treasures. Her ruby-colored eyes sparkled with a hint of tenderness and the corner of her lips curved slightly into a beautiful smile. I wonder what kind of reaction all those people who look at him with fear and hatred would have if they saw that the young man they call a tyrant and bloodthirsty demon was actually capable of putting on such a pure and innocent expression. In reality, Xietain was not a saint and had done bad things, considering that the lives of many innocent people were affected to a great or little extent due to his actions. However, when he was compared to most people, Xietain could be considered relatively righteous. He treated people as he felt they deserved to be treated based on their actions, and although he often threatened other powers with enslaving their families, the reality was that the only slaves in the entire Transcendent faction were the families of those who had betrayed his trust or plotted against him, while the families of deserters suffered no punishment whatsoever despite the law stipulating it. In the apocalypse, all morality had been thrown away by humans. Xietain had no choice but to put up the front of a person willing to commit the vilest acts in order to achieve his goals. He knew that apart from his power, if he lost his facade as a raging and cruel wolf, he would definitely be stabbed in the back a million times on the first day. Resurrection Rod, Natural Treasure Rank 3 Natural Treasure that was part of an ancient cedar tree over 10,000 years old, grown between two twisters of mana. When held close to the body, it increases the health stat by 300 points, and if given to a competent blacksmith, could be forged into a staff for which countless mages would be willing to kill. After a few moments of thought, Xietain put the rod away in his storage ring while muttering under his breath, let's leave this for Xietain. I think I can build a good weapon for her using this stick. Are you sure you're not planning to add that busted girl to your royal harem? Lilith asked with a raised eyebrow as she gave him a questioning look. Xietain rolled his eyes and pointed, royal harem? This daddy doesn't even have a kingdom and has only accepted one wife, so I don't know what you're talking about. Lilith's lips curved upward as she said with joyful eyes, little brother Xietain, you really know what to say to make a woman's heart feel sweet as honey. If you were to say that you are willing to accept a harem, then this big sister might have to castrate you later. Xietain subconsciously closed his legs and sucked in a breath of cold air as he looked at her with persistent fear. You. Don't you dare. This daddy wants at least enough children to raise a basketball team or two. Ha ha ha. Looks like we'll have our work cut out for us in that case. Lilith directly burst out laughing out loud. Her smiling face lit up the gloomy interior of the tent, and her carefree expression subconsciously made Xietain feel happy that he could make her laugh like that. After laughing good-naturedly for a good 20 seconds, Lilith finally began to calm down as she gently hugged her stomach with one hand and wiped the tears from the edge of her eyes with the other. She looked at him with an incredibly innocent expression and said softly, say, Xietain. May I ask you a slightly weird question? Xietain had reached out his hand to pick up the skill scroll, but upon hearing Lilith's words his movements froze. He looked at her curiously and said without much thought, what's wrong with you? Is it necessary for us to ask each other that kind of question? Just say what you have to say without thinking too much. We are a couple after all. Lilith kept the same faint smile on her face. Her voice sounded calm and flat, as if what she was asking was no big deal. In the hypothetical case that I or a being you love were to lose their mind. Let's take me as an example. In the hypothetical case that I lost my mind and my power got out of control, what would you do if there was no real solution to the problem? Xietain frowned and subconsciously straightened his posture as he looked at her intently. For some reason, he felt that the question Lilith was asking him was not there just for the sake of finding an answer, but that there seemed to be a deeper meaning that Xietain could not currently understand. Seeing the worried expression on Zemon's face, Lilith chuckled and said with raised eyebrows, "Don't overthink it, just say what you really feel and think about it. This is just a question I'm asking you out of pure curiosity to know how you would react to such a complicated situation like this. What would you do if you saw me or any other loved one of yours turn into a mindless being that the only thing he or she knows to do is slaughter and slaughter to the point where he or she stopped being himself or herself, even willing to kill those he or she once loved?" Although Lilith said that she was only asking out of curiosity, Zemon did not answer her question even after 5 whole minutes. Just when Lilith was about to ask him to ignore the weird question she had asked, Zemon answered in a serious voice but without looking her in the eyes. "I would find the solution." Lilith rolled her eyes and pointed, "You. I told you that there is no solution. You have to answer on the premise that there is no solution." Zemon finally turned to look at her and said in a serious voice, "If there is no solution, then it means I have to create one with my own hands. Did you forget? My goal is to surpass the highest authority in the universe, to go beyond the power of the soul record. I refuse to believe that at the end of my path I will not be able to find a solution to the problem you bring up." After a moment of silence, Lilith sighed and closed her eyes. "Right. If it's you, maybe you'd be able to do it." The two were silent for a few minutes before Zemon suddenly asked, "Lilith, what about you? What would you do if I lost control of myself and turned into a killing machine?" Zemon asked as he recalled the first strange dream he had, that dream in which he saw what seemed to be a more mature and adult version of himself slaughtering myriads of races and annihilating all life. At Lilith's surprised stare, he pointed out, at the end of the day, the Blood Berserker's Wrath skill could go into overdrive at any time. The triggers of the last levels are a mystery, which is dangerous from several points of view. Unlike Lilith's seemingly casual question but which probably held some hidden meaning, Zemon's question was very serious regarding something that could potentially occur in the future. Surprisingly, Lilith did not hesitate or take too long to answer. Her beautiful ruby eyes shone with a hint of sadness, her pupils dilated as she looked at him with tenderness and affection. She reached a hand forward and gently caressed his face as she said softly, "If that were to happen, then I would kill you." Zemon simply used his eyes as black as night to look into her eyes. His expression did not change, waiting for her next words. "Unlike you, Zemon, I do not have the ability to overcome the soul record. Only you can do that." She forced a smile and said softly, "I would rather kill you with my own hands than let you hurt those you were willing to die for. I know you would want that too. After I kill you, I will end my life and go to keep you company if there is life after death." After a few seconds, Zemon closed his eyes and took a moment to process and understand Lilith's words. Finally, he nodded as if he understood something before opening his eyes again. "Don't worry, Lilith." His serious voice thick with resolve filled the tent. "Such a thing will definitely not happen with me, I promise. I want to be your partner, someone capable of helping you ease your burdens and not someone who will add more weight to your baggage." Zemon took the hand Lilith was using to caress his face and gently kissed the top before looking into her eyes and saying with a smile, "I want to be your partner. The partner of a succubus in the apocalypse." Chapter 8:23 Second Princess arrives on the front lines. Several minutes had passed since Zemon and Lilith had said their last words before they both fell into silence. Both of them closed their eyes and enjoyed simply listening to the sound of voices coming from the distance or the sound of soldiers' footsteps and mutant horses. Sometimes, silence was a better speaker than words, as many times only silence could allow us to feel with the heart what the ears could not express. He could feel her gratitude floating in the air as she could feel his affection and love. As for why Lilith felt grateful to Zemon, she knew that he knew the reason but simply said nothing to avoid bringing up a topic that would probably open old wounds. As if they had planned it or as if they sensed each other's intention, Zemon and Lilith opened their eyes at the same time. With a faint smile, he slowly said, "Well, let's continue to look at what Daddy got this time." "Okay, Daddy Zemon." Zemon's eyes sparkled and his head lifted so fast that for a moment Lilith doubted how many points he had in his agility stat. What did you say?" he asked with wide eyes. Lilith pursed her lips slightly and said in an innocent voice, "At least for a few minutes I'll agree to be your little Lilith." His eyes sparkled again, this time more brightly than the previous one, and he said in a husky voice, "Little Lilith, if you would call me that in bed, this Daddy would definitely take good care of you without having to make you suffer." The corner of Lilith's mouth twitched a couple of times as she stared at him. "You're quite perverted, aren't you?" "I am." He nodded without hesitation. "Don't say it so proud of yourself. The truth is no offense," Zemon said as he picked up the purple-colored dagger. The weapon's records immediately flashed in his retina. Fang of the Putrid Echo, epic grade treasure, a dagger that was once a rank 6 piece of equipment with child consciousness. After its original user died and it was lost for over 100,000 years, the soul record picked it up, but the child consciousness had perished. After turning it into a treasure and despite the loss of power, its rank is worthy of an epic treasure. Stats: Agility 200, Strength 200, Stamina 200, Health 50, Magic 100. Normal physical attacks performed with Fang of the Putrid Echo have a 100% chance to corrode the enemy's blood once the dagger managed to come into contact with skin and flesh. The corroding will spread throughout the enemy's body, paralyzing nerves and eventually culminating in death if the enemy does not possess an antidote of rank 4 or higher. Note: only works on enemies below the user's level. Once every 3 seconds, the attached skill Echo will automatically activate in combat, effectively ignoring the enemy's defense as long as the armor in the attacked area does not reach or exceed 8,000 physical defense points and resulting in a direct attack to the enemy's body. Seeing the terrifying power of the dagger in his hands, and even though he had checked its records before, Xietain couldn't help but sigh. This is the first epic grade treasure meant for combat I have seen, and I must say it really is terrifying. This dagger alone bestows the one holding it with such an absurd amount of stats that an ordinary level 1 human could easily start slaughtering first-order soul evolvers. Xietain played with the purple-colored dagger as he said with lingering astonishment, "Besides, the 2 passive skills this weapon has are really horrible for any enemy. No wonder Shadow Killer managed to hurt me even though my armor took practically no damage at all. It's a good weapon, but it's not good to rely too much on soul record treasures. At the end of the day, the treasures will eventually become useless to us, and if our enemies manage to get us away from them, our stats will drop tremendously," Lilith pointed out calmly. "Of course, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be put to good use. That dagger you have is really a good weapon, worthy of a 4th-order soul evolver to use, considering that rank 4 antidotes aren't easy to acquire or make." Xietain nodded. "If it weren't for the fact that I have the skill Blood Manipulation upgraded to 3rd order, I'm afraid it would have been very hard to fight against the poison from this dagger." He held the dagger in his body for the sake of receiving the fierce stat boost the weapon guaranteed the wielder before turning to the skill scroll that dropped when Shadow Killer died. Drain Life, 1st order active skill, level 5. When activating this skill, the user will be able to absorb the life energy of its enemies, thus healing the user's wounds using the enemy's health. The skill only works on weakened or restricted targets and only can be activated on one target at a time. It consumes 50 mana points to be activated and 5 mana points for every second the skill is active. After being activated and deactivated, the skill will go into cooldown time for 10 minutes. Good skill. Xietan's eyes shone as he clenched the scroll tightly. This skill is definitely staying with me. When I finally make it into the 2nd order, I must learn it no matter what. Lilith's eyes also lit up after touching the tip of the skill scroll. That is indeed a good skill. For a person like you who due to using such a crazy and wild combat style, this skill is definitely like a heaven-sent gift. Especially considering that you have such wonderful skills such as your blood manipulation and gravity manipulation skill. Xietain carefully kept the scroll containing the Drain Life skill in his storage ring before finally moving his attention to the deep blue sword. This thing should be good, no? No matter how we put it, this sword was the weapon of one of the most powerful humans in this world. Xietain lifted the weapon by the hilt and at least at first glance admitted that it looked elegant and powerful just based on appearance and aura. The first thing Xietain noticed even before the records of the sword were presented to him was that when he held the sword he felt his body temperature adjust as if by magic to the optimal point. Perfect Storm, Long Sword. Rank, 3, Physical Attack Power, 5,800, Magic Attack Power, 2,000. Options. 1. When fighting on or under water, the magic attack power is tripled. 2. When fighting on or under water, the physical attack power increases by 4,000 points. 3. Active water-type skills deal 40% more damage than normal. 4. Once every 5 days, the user can use the skill Storm to perform a large-scale magic attack capable of decreasing the agility of all enemies below level 140 by 20%. Durability, 6,500/6,500. Description, a weapon forged 3,200 years ago, being the product of the manipulation of the average blacksmith and rune encryptor, who after many years of study managed to superficially understand the true power of the runes. This is the perfectly balanced weapon when it comes to physical attacks or magical attacks. It really is a good sword. Xietain nodded as he looked at the sword now, not only for its elegant design but also for the power it held. This is the first time I've seen a skill in a weapon forged by a human, he said. Even his Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words didn't have a skill. Well, considering that even after more than 3,000 years this sword was still held as the most powerful weapon of one of the most powerful families in this world, it is normal for it to at least meet certain quality requirements. Lilith shrugged her shoulders. The sword in the hands of Baizemen was nothing in her eyes, but to a lower existence it was undoubtedly a godly weapon. Too bad, this sword doesn't suit my fighting style at all. Baizemen shook his head. Besides, my compatibility with fire is higher than with water. I have the endless lotus blue flame, a natural flame that once had the power to kill gods. I don't need skills or items that conflict with its power. He put the sword away in his storage ring and said casually, I will pass this sword to Bing Shui when I get back to Earth. This sword will definitely pair well with her ice and blizzard skills. Why, are you now planning to add even the ice princess to your harem? Baizemen simply remained silent, wisely deciding not to want to get in another one of the mischievous succubus pranks sitting next to him. Because of the war, Baizemen had decided that it was best to give the soldiers a day to rest and replenish their energy before continuing to move in a northerly direction. The Xietain kingdom had lost both its king and its main army, so at this point there were only a little over 150,000 capable soul evolvers scattered around the kingdom. This meant that Baizemen just needed to push forward and take over the defeated kingdom's territory. He did not plan to let another kingdom benefit from his efforts in any way. According to the king of the Dacia kingdom, his soldiers should be arriving at the border between the Xietain kingdom and the Gales kingdom by approximately noon tomorrow. Once the army of the Dacia kingdom got there, Baizemen planned to continue moving northward, and in a week at most he would not only have occupied the territory of the Xietain kingdom but a new kingdom would have been defeated. That was how confident he was. The army that Baizemen currently controlled was so large that unless other kingdoms joined in, it would be completely impossible for them to resist at all. With over 1,100,000 soul evolvers, 500,000 mounts, and 32,000 mutant beasts capable of fighting against enemies above their levels, no kingdom in the entire Eventide world would be able to stop him even for a day unless they formed an alliance of a minimum of 3 kingdoms. When the troops from the Dacia kingdom arrived tomorrow noon, the number of soldiers under Baizemen's power would reach a terrifying figure of 1,600,000. Even if the army formed by the forces of Gales, Krap, Xietain, and Dacia were not completely united because Baizemen was pressuring them using force and threats, the power of numbers could not be ignored, not to mention the fact that the soul evolvers that made up the army would not stand idly by and watch as others tried to kill them in the wars to come. The next day, Baizemen was monitoring the movement of the troops being led by the generals to form up. They were preparing to leave in an hour's time. General Lazes, did you finish the job I tasked you with? Baizemen asked calmly as he kept his eyes fixed on the army. It's done. Lazes nodded after a few seconds of silence. He looked at Baizemen and said in a complicated voice, Xavier was a great warrior who helped save the lives of many comrades as we fought orcs and mutant beasts. I never expected for him to be a traitor. Xavier was the name of the second-order soul evolver who had tried to force Baizemen into a deep sleep using some kind of toxin he mixed into the food. After spotting a traitor, Baizemen did what he had to do to free himself from the plague. The hearts of people are as deep and mysterious as the oceans are, General. Our allies today could be our enemies tomorrow, that's how it is. Sometimes, it's best to expect the worst from everyone, even if that's not the right way to live. Baizemen patted the shoulder of the man next to him as he recalled all the experiences he had gone through so far during the nearly 6 months his life changed when the soul record arrived on Earth. Watching my back from my own allies? I'd rather kill myself than doubt the ones who bleed for me. Lazes shook his head and sighed. He looked at the young man beside him and asked with a complex expression on his face, General Bai, may I ask you a slightly personal question? Go ahead. After hesitating for a moment, Lazes asked quietly, based on what you said just now, would it be correct for me to assume that there is no one you really trust in? There are. They are few, but there are. Baizemen replied without looking at him. If it is all right with you, could you tell me who those people are? I am curious about who might make a person who said what you said to me moments before trust. My family, the woman I love, the only girl I can call a true friend, the few subordinates who are under the effect of the skill-loyal follower making them unable to betray me, and last, air-type mutant beast. Baizemen's words were cut off when a soldier shouted loudly, drawing everyone's attention to the sky. Seeing the large snow-white bat swiftly flying towards them from the south, General Lazes' expression changed. Seeing that the mages were preparing to attack just as the archers were preparing to attack, he quickly roared loudly, Stop! That mount belongs to the second princess of our Gales kingdom. Baizemen watched as Seraphina's 2 ponytails flapped furiously as the giant white bat flapped its wings in the sky. Seeing her glaring at him with fierce eyes and making a neck-slashing gesture, he muttered under his breath, and, last but not least, an annoying princess with a peculiar personality who saved my life and took care of me while I was helpless. Chapter 8:24 Saying rude words but having a kind heart. Orc! You better give me an explanation of what's going on or else. Inside the central tent, Xietain didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the second princess of the Gale's kingdom glaring at him with fierce eyes and her little white fist raised at him. Should he tell her that instead of looking intimidating with her gesture all she was doing was looking adorable like a little puppy dog? Xietain seriously considered it for a few seconds before deciding it was best to keep his mouth shut to live another day. Your Majesty Ponytails, why don't you better take a seat first so we can talk like two civilized people? Xietain pointed to the seat in front of him and said with a suggestive smile, in Gales, we civilized people take a seat to have serious conversations. Seraphina opened her eyes and stared at him trying to hold back the urge to jump on him and bite him to death. How dare this orc mock her and say back to her the words she had said to him the first day he regained consciousness. Despite her thoughts, Seraphina sat obediently. Seeing her stare at him in search of answers, Xietain sighed. First of all, would you mind telling me the reason you came all this way? He frowned and said in a serious voice, Seraphina, this battlefield will only get worse as the days go by. Many will die and the blood of humans will run like rivers. Seraphina's face turned slightly pale but the flame of determination in her gaze did not waver. I want you to tell me why you and my dad suddenly decided to turn all the kingdoms of the world into our enemies. What you are doing is madness. Even if you and my father are powerful, taking on more than 40 kingdom kings and millions of soldiers is simply impossible. Not even the Demon Lord managed to do something like this hundreds of years ago despite being the most powerful soul evolver in Eventide world. The Demon Lord is the Demon Lord and me is me. I know this may sound a bit arrogant, but believe me you will come to understand me better if you don't compare me to anyone you have ever met in your life or heard of. Xietain shook his head and advised. Seraphina took a deep breath and held the air in her lungs for a few seconds before releasing it all at once. I know you are powerful. Even Liam is not as strong as you even though you are only a first-order soul evolver. But, Eventide world is clearly several centuries more developed than the world you come from. How do you know that? He asked with a slight frown. After all, Xietain had never discussed anything about Earth with anyone from this world. Seraphina hesitated for a moment before deciding to be honest. She blushed slightly and looked down at her clenched fists on her knees as she said quietly, actually, when I found you unconscious it was me who took off your armor and the cloth robes you were wearing so I could clean the wounds and blood from your body before I could heal you. My good friend is an excellent rune encryptor. She told me that whoever drew the runes on your equipment was clearly learning but was definitely very talented. Before even Xietain could say anything, she raised her head with her face so red it looked like a bomb about to explode and shouted exaggeratedly, don't misunderstand me. I only did what I did as a sign of kindness since I am the second princess of Gales. It's only natural for me to help a fallen person in the territory of my kingdom. Noticing the anxiety in the eyes of the young girl in front of him, Xietain lost all desire to poke a little at her. I know it was you who helped me and who healed me. He nodded, surprising her. His voice was earnest and full of honesty as he said with his deepest sincerity, thank you for what you did for me that day. If it wasn't for you I might have died in the mouth of some strange creature. I still can't afford to die, many people are waiting for me and depending on me to survive in my world. The nerves and shyness Seraphina was feeling after revealing the truth vanished as quickly as did her surprise at hearing Xietain reveal that he already knew everything. Instead, her expression became somewhat hesitant as she asked in a somewhat sad voice, you really have to go back don't you? Xietain forced a smile as he considered in his heart whether to reveal to the girl in front of him the truth or not. However, there wasn't much to consider as he believed and trusted her completely. At the end of the day, Seraphina had seen him at his lowest point and still took the trouble to help and care for him despite her position. Seraphina, do you want me to tell you about my world? I'm sure you'll understand a little more about me and my situation by then. I want to. I do. She nodded, perhaps a little too fast as her eyes shone. Seraphina had always wanted to ask more about his personal life, however, she was aware that to do such a thing would be impolite. Especially considering the fact that Xietain was clearly a very cautious person, he would definitely not reveal anything about his personal life to a person he had just met less than a month ago. So, sit comfortably, because even though it's a not-so-distant story it's quite long and complicated. Xietain sighed before he began to narrate everything he experienced during the past months, omitting some events and pointing directly for the most important ones. At first, Serafina's expression was one of mockery after hearing that half a year ago Xietain was just a normal level 0 human who worked and studied simple stuff without even a shred of mana in his body. However, seeing the complicated expression and mixed feelings in his eyes, the expression on Serafina's face soon turned to shock as she realized that he was not joking. The more she listened, the greater the shock became. However, that shock eventually changed and at some point in his narration turned to sadness. Approximately 20 minutes later, Xietain looked at Serafina and said slowly, "Now that you know how things are on my home world, I think you should understand a little more about why I need to return. If it wasn't because I need the technology and knowledge of this world in order to power my faction and save the humanity of my world from being annihilated by the enemy races, I definitely wouldn't be willing to stay in Eventide world for so long." Serafina was unable to say anything for several minutes. She covered her mouth with both hands as she looked at him with trembling eyes and looked like she had 1,000 things to say, but in reality, it was hard for her to even say any words. It was only after what seemed like an eternity that a small voice came out from through her fingers. I'm sorry. I didn't know your world was like that." In contrast to her and the humans of Eventide world, Xietain and all the humans of Earth had no point of reference. Since many generations ago, every time a baby was born in Eventide world it slowly learned about the dangers of the world, so it was nothing strange. However, the Earth had started to evolve half a year ago. All of humanity had literally been thrown without warning and without explanation into a pool of burning water where everyone had to fend for themselves to avoid the areas where the water was the hottest without even knowing what they were facing. Serafina could only try to imagine how much hardship Xietain and the people of his world had to go through to reach this point. Remembering how she scoffed when he told her that he knew a 9-year-old girl who was probably already on her way to the Second Order, and remembering how she raised her chin proudly when she revealed to him that at the age of 16 she was close to level 70, Serafina felt ashamed and guilty. It was only after learning the fact that Xietan's world was so abnormal and that everyone he knew or not knew experienced the baptism of the apocalypse just as mankind's ancestors in Eventide world had done that Serafina realized how great the difference between the two was. Serafina had been born a proud princess who had everything from birth, and when she went out hunting to level up she was always under the guard of powerful soul evolvers. In contrast, the 9-year-old girl that Xietain mentioned had nothing, and to avoid going through some hardships again she did not hesitate even for a second to get blood on her hands while putting her life on the line to gain a little more soul power and raise her level. Xietain couldn't help but feel a little regretful about telling Serafina the whole truth when he saw the expression she had on her face. He had only did what he did so that she could understand a little more of the reasons why he was obligated to take this opportunity while offering great benefits to Gales. However, he did not expect this kind of result at all. First generation. Lilith's voice sounded next to Xietain. Only he was aware of her existence as she slowly explained. This is how the existences that experience in flesh and blood the beginning of the evolution of a world are generally called. Usually, first-generation existences always become more powerful than those of later generations because they are nurtured with battles to the death from the first minute until the moment their lives end. At the end of the day, every first-generation existence like you always experiences a crueler world than those yet to come, and precisely because of that they grow to be much stronger warriors. It took Serafina more than 10 minutes to manage to calm down enough to speak properly. "No wonder you are so powerful even though you are at level 50. She said with a forced smile and red eyes. Although she hadn't cried, it hadn't been too far away from doing so. But, to think that you actually managed to build a faction of several 100,000 in such a short time even though you were just a student when the soul record arrived in your world. You must be pretty incredible even in a world as crazy as yours, aren't you?" Xietain winked at her and said in a joking tone to lighten the mood a bit, "That's why I received the title Irregular. I once even weakened my world's spatial barrier, which led to another race invading us after all." "Don't say that with pride, please." Serafina shook her head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry seeing the expression on Xietan's face. Before he could say anything, Serafina closed her eyes and took a deep breath before looking at him with determination as if she had made some kind of important decision. "Orc Xietain, you should return to your world as soon as possible. Just as you said, many people are waiting for your return and need you to survive in a chaotic world like Earth." Don't worry. I will take care of gathering all the most important blueprints and formulas of my Gales, and I will have other people work to make copies for you." Hearing Serafina's words, Xietan's eyes flashed mysteriously and his pupils trembled for a split second. He maintained his composure as he slowly asked, "If I return, your father the king and Gales will have to face the wrath of many kingdoms. Are you sure of what you are saying?" What he meant was that the entire Gale's kingdom would be submerged under a sea of flames before 24 hours had passed. After all, it was impossible for King Philip to fight two kingdom kings at the same time unless he activated some suicidal skill to exchange his life for the lives of others. However, Gales would immediately fall without the protection of a soul evolver with the strength of a kingdom king. Humph, my kingdom isn't weak enough to fall down in front of some small fries. Seraphina snorted and said with confidence, if the other kingdoms know what's good for them they will surrender, or else my father will kick their butts. Even the demon General Belgos, who was ranked number 5 among the 10 general demons, was slaughtered by my father's spear in less than 3 hours. Xietain stared at her for several seconds, perhaps too much for the little heart of the innocent princess. You? What are you looking at? She looked at him with suspicion. He sighed and closed his eyes as he thought in his heart, child, try repeating those words in front of a mirror and you'll see how pale your face turned. Seraphina was a terrible liar. However, this was one of the reasons why Xietain believed he could trust her. He opened his eyes and said gently, you are really kind, little kid. Before she could say anything, he stood up and patted her head several times. Seraphina subconsciously brought both hands to her head and stroked the still warm spot where his palm had just touched. As she turned to look at him and was about to ask what he was doing, Xietan's voice thundered through the camp. Soldiers, get ready to depart. In 10 minutes from now we will be entering the territory of the defeated Xietain kingdom and will continue advancing in a northerly direction to subdue the neighboring kingdom of Xietain after meeting up with the allied troops of the Dacia kingdom. Seraphina looked at him with wide eyes. You. Xietain looked over his shoulder at her and said with a faint smile, Ponytail's princess, you'd better return home. As I said before, this battlefield will be much bloodier soon when I start conquering the rest of the kingdoms located northwest of Eventide World. Chapter 8:25 Eventide World learns his name. The troops of the Gale's kingdom advanced as planned. The army of soul evolvers moved in a northerly direction, some were on foot while others used mounts. However, the truth was that when they sensed various powerful auras belonging to second-order existences, the mutant beasts and other creatures behaved considerably well. Of course, because the unclassified or first-order beasts had practically no intelligence, there were not a few that left their territories in search of food upon smelling the scent of fresh food only to end up being devoured by various active skills even before they could get within 100 meters of the outer area of the army. Are you sure about this? Asked Xietain while riding a red-eyed horse, a tamed mount that was once a first-order mutant beast. Beside him, the second princess of the Gale's kingdom rode another red-eyed horse as she looked straight ahead with a firm expression on her young face. I'm sure. Seraphina nodded firmly. Everyone is doing their utmost for the sake of Gales. Even my older sister and the others headed north to protect the border in case another enemy kingdom appears. It is in this kind of situation that the royal family of Gales must step forward to protect the citizens of the kingdom. Honor, glory, adoration, protection, care, love. From birth and thanks to her status, Seraphina had it all. Those people who had given her everything were the citizens of Gales that trusted in the royal family. Now it was time for her to prove to those people that they were not wrong about her and her family. Xietain nodded and said nothing more. However, he still needed to emphasize one thing before a new enemy appeared. Seraphina, have you ever killed a human? Killed a human? Seraphina turned her face to look at him, feeling surprised by his question but even more surprised by the answer she gave. I did kill many orcs, mutant beasts, ghost trees, wild plants, demons. But I have never killed a human. Different from Earth, Eventide World was a world divided into peaceful kingdoms that even had a kind of alliance to avoid wars among themselves. Therefore, it was not at all strange that a princess like Seraphina, who had never left the territory of her family's kingdom, ever had to kill another human being, since probably the humans who had to be killed, such as thieves or bandits, were secretly taken care of by her bodyguards. As much as I would like to say beautiful words, I'm afraid it is necessary for me to be honest. Xietain said. He looked at her with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, if you decide to take part in this bloody battle, it will be impossible for you not to kill humans. After all, I don't think all the kingdoms will submit unless we give them a demonstration of power first. For several minutes, Seraphina remained silent as her brain tried to process the words Xietain had said to her. If someone told her that she needed to kill demons or mutant beasts, she would not hesitate at all. At the end of the day, this was what she had been doing to gain soul power and level up. However, killing those who were her own kind was something Seraphina hadn't thought about, even though in her heart she knew it was only a matter of time. Orc, you. Did you kill? Seraphina stopped in the middle of her words, soon realizing how stupid her question was going to be. Even then, Xietain answered anyway. His voice was light as was his expression, even though his words were so heavy. I did kill humans, I have killed many of them. Among those I have killed, there are even innocents. I know that even though I don't know them. It is not something I am proud of, and just as I know my sins I accept them and live with it, carrying the name, age, and appearance of each of the people I have killed deeply engraved in the records that make up my existence. This is my punishment, but it is a punishment I am willing to live with if it will allow me to survive and protect those I have to protect. Serafina looked at him silently, and a glint of compassion flashed in her kind emerald eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she asked in a whisper, "Was it hard for you to kill? The first time surely must not have been easy, was it?" Xietain sighed in his heart. How could he not understand that Serafina was scared by what she knew would happen sooner than she expected? "Child, due to certain events in the past that marked me too deeply, I awakened a passive skill during the beginning of the apocalypse. This skill had turned me into a perfect war machine that didn't hesitate to crush anything that got in my way, so the first time I killed a human felt no different than when I killed my first mutant creature." I see. Serafina nodded slowly. "By the way, I'm not a child." Despite her curiosity, she did not ask about the skill Xietain was talking about, as asking about another person's skills was considered disrespectful and offensive. Approximately 5 hours later, and after having entered the territory of the Xietain kingdom, the army led by Xietain and Serafina finally met up with the troops of the Dacia kingdom that were moving in a southerly direction towards Gales. With the king of Dacia, Felix de Dacia present, the Dacia kingdom army naturally raised no objections and immediately integrated with the allied troops despite the soldiers' doubts. It took Xietain and his army 4 full days to take control of 4 of the 5 major cities and 10 minor towns that were within the large territory of the Xietain kingdom. Of course, while they were working hard to subdue the remnant troops that had been left behind in the kingdom to protect the weak citizens of the other races, the world was neither still nor silent. The Gales kingdom, which days ago had sent letters to the 48 human kingdoms detailing the events that had occurred at the back of the mountain where the royal family's castle was located, and demanding the surrender of all the kingdoms after considering them as traitors to humanity for colluding with the demons, finally engaged in war with several kingdoms at the same time. However, when news of the conclusion of these wars spread, the whole world trembled. The Gales kingdom defeated the main army of the Crap kingdom in the north of Weimar City. The troops of the Crap kingdom submitted and joined the troops of Gales to fight against the rest of the kingdoms. In the west, King Philip de Gales and his army fought for 3 days and 3 nights against the Boeotian kingdom and finally managed to take the victory when the King of Gales managed to pierce King Albert's heart at the cost of a deep wound in his left shoulder. In the north, the first Princess Ellis with an army of only 60,000 men managed to resist for 4 full days the assault of the advanced troops composed of a total of 140,000 soul evolvers affiliated to the Fora kingdom that would soon cross the territory of the defeated Crap kingdom and push into the borders of Gales. It was expected that the troops of the first princess would fall before the main army of the Fora kingdom in the next 48 hours. However, the news that not only shook all the human kingdoms but also the rest of the intelligent civilizations of other races came from the east of Eventide world. The Gales kingdom and the Xietain kingdom clashed on the border between both kingdoms, being the troops of Gales pushed back more than 10 kilometers, suffering a great defeat during the first day due to the great numerical disadvantage. However, the next day things took a 180-degree turn when a mysterious person arrived leading the subdued troops of the in that time recently defeated Crap kingdom. During those next 24 hours, not only did the Gales kingdom manage to push the Xietain kingdom back more than 7 kilometers, thus recovering almost all the territory they had lost the day before, but the Mage General Christopher Rogers, level 93, was killed by the main general of the Gales troops. The fall of a well-known figure only a few years short of reaching level 100 using normal means was enough to shock everyone. However, this was not the main news. The news that really shook everyone's heart was that on the morning of the 3rd day and before the sun rose, the legendary and feared Shadow Killer made his appearance by successfully sneaking into the Gales kingdom camp, ignoring all traps and powerhouses until he reached the tent where the main general was staying. To everyone's disbelief and horror, Shadow Killer did not succeed in his assassination as everyone was used to. Not only did Shadow Killer fail to kill the general of Gales, but he ended up losing his life after a fierce 1-versus-1 battle in which it is said he was completely overwhelmed, barely managing to wound the other side. At first, no one believed it, but as more and more began to affirm this fact, the seed of doubt was finally planted. It wasn't until later, when Shadow Killer's head was seen stuck on a silver spear in the north of Gales, that everyone finally accepted the truth. Shadow Killer was killed. The Dacia kingdom surrendered without even fighting against the Gales kingdom, and King Felix D. Dacia decided to join by Xietain to subjugate the other kingdoms. When this news spread from city to city until finally reaching the far corners of the world, it didn't matter if it was human or demon, orc or mutant beast, everyone felt their hearts grow cold. Even the king of the Fora kingdom, who was about to step into the territory of Gales and clash with the troops led by the first Princess Ellis, ordered his soldiers to stop their advance and set up several tents as if they had no intention of advancing anytime soon, while looking from the distance at the head of the legendary assassin, who seemed to be looking at them as a warning of what would happen if they continued their advance. Soon enough, the name of the mysterious figure who had accomplished the breathtaking feat of cutting off the head of the legendary Shadow Killer finally leaked out, and as fast as a flash of bright lightning streaking across the skies, it spread far and wide to the point where even the small children knew his name. By Xietain? Who is that? I don't know. He doesn't seem to be someone from Gales with that name. But, in that case, why is this by Xietain fighting alongside Gales, even without hesitating to oppose all the other kingdoms? There is no way that a person as powerful as by Xietain would think the same as us normal people. In this kind of situation, instead of trying to understand the thoughts of a soul evolver capable of killing Shadow Killer, the best we can do is to wait and see. If this guy named by Xietain truly sides completely with Gales and can't be bought off by wealth or beauties, then I'm afraid Gales' rise will be hard to stop. Wealth? By Xietain took over the territory of an entire kingdom and its treasures, soon even the territory of the Crap Kingdom will be claimed by Gales. Do you think that kind of person can be bribed with fortunes that he can easily obtain by himself? As for beauties, it seems you did not hear the rumors. Rumors? What do you mean? Let me tell you. It is said that King Philip D. Gales offered the hand of his two daughters to by Xietain, and he accepted after having witnessed their beautiful porcelain faces and alluring bodies. The first Princess Ellis and the second Princess Seraphina are not only beauties of the highest rank but are also considered to be two of the most brilliant geniuses the whole world has seen in the last 4,000 years. Gah, man, I am so envious. Enjoying both sisters at the same time in the same bed. The two princesses of the most powerful kingdom both serving the same man. Can you even imagine it? Most powerful kingdom? Gales is? Well, Gales now has almost 2 million troops and over 300,000 tamed mutant beasts. Even if we leave aside the terrifying by Xietain, the current Gales kingdom has over 40 second-order soul evolvers. They might be able to stand on equal footing with the three parent kingdoms. Now that you mention it, all sorts of rumors spread at such high speeds that it was hard to believe. However, one thing was certain and undeniable. The name by Xietain had gone from being unknown and foreign to widely known by the masses, to the point where every single tavern in every city or town was filled with all sorts of conversations involving him. As for the person in question, he was currently standing at the northern end of the Xietain Kingdom's territory, standing before the wide stone door that guarded Xietain City against any invasion. Chapter 826 Xietain City. On the most normal mount used by the army troops, a red-eyed horse that added 65 points of agility to its rider but had no combat capability worth of mentioning, by Xietain looked at the great city walls in front of him. Perfectly white walls, free of cracks as if they had never experienced any kind of enemy attack, and as if time itself could not weaken their defenses. However, after having been in this world for almost an entire month, by Xietain learned that the appearances of structures were often misleading. A silver-scaled lizard emerged from among the army troops. Riding the second-order mutant beast, King Felix D. Dacia stopped next to by Xietan's mount with his eyes gazing at the city in the distance. After a few seconds of silence, the King of Dacia introduced, "This is Xietain City, the last city that probably has about 50,000 soldiers of the Xietain Kingdom and around 2 million citizens. Maybe more, but definitely not by too much." A new mount approached the duo, this time a simple red-eyed horse. However, no one dared to look down on the horse's rider, as she was the second princess of Gales. I remember reading regarding Xietain City in the past while studying the geography of the Xietain Kingdom. It was built over 9,800 years ago and is considered one of the first human cities raised by the ancestors during the beginning of our world's evolution. Many tried to overthrow Xietain City over the years, from humans and mutant beasts to demons and wild plants or wandering orcs. However, they all failed, not only because of the robustness of its walls but also because of the bravery of the soldiers who always fight to the death to protect its boundaries. By Xietain kept his eyes fixed in the distance as Seraphina's sweet, youthful voice entered his ears. It is said that beneath Xietain City lies a secret passageway leading to a shrine that only the king of each generation affiliated to the Xietain Kingdom is allowed to access. Apparently, a great defensive treasure that turns the city walls into an indestructible fortress is hidden there. Xietain nodded silently as he thought of what to do at the same time as the events that occurred during the past 4 days became clearer in his memory. Leaving a total of 500,000 soul evolvers behind, the territory of the Xietain Kingdom finally fell into the hands of the Gales Kingdom, with 4 of its 5 major cities completely occupied, with the only remnant being this Xietain city before him. Although there was still a lot of political work to be done, that was not Xietan's business, as it would not be easy to get the citizens of Xietain to fully agree about joining Gales, at least, not in this generation, and Xietain did not have time to play SimCity in this world. His goal was to keep his word, to give King Philip the opportunity to rule over the humanity of Eventide world. As for what would happen after that, Xietain was unable to decide, since he would be returning to Earth when his mission was complete. Xietain nimbly climbed down from his mount, and as he walked off drew his signature weapon as slowly approached the doors of the apparently impenetrable city. Seraphina climbed down from her mount and quickly followed close behind. Seeing him looking at her in confusion, she snorted, "You only know how to settle everything with your fists, but this princess is more civilized and can convince people with reasonable words. Don't tell me you already forgot what happened 2 days ago in Ankla's city?" Remembering how 2 days ago he almost destroyed a city to make the soldiers inside come out to surrender, but Seraphina managed to make the troops of the Xietain Kingdom surrender after several minutes. Xietain wisely shut his mouth and continued to move towards the city before them. Surprisingly, however, not only did Xietain not have to raise his greatsword to cut through the walls, but Seraphina did not even have to open her mouth to say anything. Rumble. The ground trembled slightly as under the watchful eyes of the army in the distance the large double doors of Xietain city began to move backwards. Xietain narrowed his eyes and subconsciously used his body to protect the little princess behind him, as mages were defensively weaker by nature. At the same time, his eyes moved along the towers located on top of the walls, and he noticed that each of them seemed to have 2 peculiar-looking cannons on the sides. Soon, a couple consisting of a man and a woman emerged from inside the city. There were no soldiers or powerful guards protecting this couple, even though both were clearly people of great status in the city and thus in the defeated Xietain Kingdom. The woman was beautiful and the man handsome, both walked with elegance and wore expensive silk clothing. "Kind warriors of Gales, please don't attack," the man shouted as he tried to raise higher the white flag tied to a wooden pole. It seems that raising the white flag is considered a symbol of surrender or peace everywhere, regardless of kingdom or world. Xietain shook his head secretly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. The army led by Xietain entered Xietain city without difficulty or hindrance once the doors were opened wide. The citizens of the Xietain Kingdom watched in fear and apprehension from the sides of the main road as the large army of soul evolvers and mutant beasts entered the city. These soldiers had experienced real wars, and many of them still had wounds to heal or stains of enemy blood that had dried on their armor. Seeing the fear in the eyes of the adults and older ones, Xietain could not help but frown. "Lord Bai, is there something bothering you?" Noticing the frown on Xietan's face, the young man asked while riding a red-eyed horse that a soldier had passed to him. "It's nothing." Xietain shook his head before casually ordering, "Organize the citizens to gather in the vicinity of the central city square first. Princess Seraphina will give a speech when the sun begins to descend." Despite being confused, the young man nodded and quickly rode off on the horse to make preparations as he had been instructed. As for the beautiful woman, she was in charge of leading Xietain, Seraphina, and the king of Dacia to the most luxurious mansion in Xietain city, which from now on would be the place where they would be staying. Before leaving, Xietain called General Lazes and ordered in a deep voice, "General, send scouts to the north, only a small number of men will do. Also, be sure to move our trusted men to assure the key places in the city, especially the towers on the walls. Let the soldiers take short rotations to allow them to recover the energy lost during the last few days." General Lazes nodded without hesitation, and after a typical Eventide world military salute took the troops with him to set up a camp just north of Xietain city, only 100 meters from the north entrance. Approximately 40 minutes later, Xietain was with his eyes closed and his body almost completely submerged in a large pool of warm water inside a giant bath that could easily become a large house on its own if the proper divisions were made. The walls were covered with a strange silver paper or cloth that was immune to moisture but slightly glossy. Large thick round columns over 5 meters high connected the white marble floor to the roof. The bathroom was practically completely covered with steam, making the temperature feel hot but pleasant. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of water falling into the pool from the large waterfall cascading down from both sides' walls. Phew. Even though my body was clean thanks to the impurities being flushed out by my own system because of the purity of my soul, not taking a shower for 2 days really doesn't feel nice. Zemon's voice sounded lazily within the four wide walls. Because the army did not even stop to sleep for the past 2 days in order to quickly reach the north of the Xietain kingdom, neither Zemon nor anyone else had the opportunity to take a proper bath or rest. That was precisely why he had ordered General Lazes to have the soldiers take short turns so that they could rest. What Zemon did not know was that while he was taking a shower, Seraphina was being led to the same bath he was in by the beautiful woman who had opened the city doors to prevent the troops stationed in Xietain city from having to face off against the seemingly unstoppable troops of Gales. Princess Seraphina, I am sure you must be feeling both physically and mentally exhausted after traveling for long days alongside the army, said the woman whose name was Ruth, daughter of the mayor of Xietain city. Seraphina sighed and nodded subconsciously. I think I understand the difficulties of the army a little better now. Hopefully, and this foolish war will be over soon. Her Majesty Seraphina's kindness and gentleness have become widely known by the army of Gales. Even the troops of our defeated Xietain kingdom were heard saying good words about you. Such a young princess joining the army for the sake of being together with her beloved even in times of war will definitely become a story that will be narrated for years to come. Ruth's eyes glistened slightly as she paused in front of the huge bathroom door. Beloved? Seraphina frowned slightly, feeling that something was wrong. Unfortunately, the young woman named Ruth didn't give her too much time to think. Come in, I'm sure you'll be able to relax in here, said as she opened the doors wide. Chapter 827 Being chased by a princess through the woods in a bathrobe. Seraphina subconsciously took half a step back as the hot steam flew out from inside the bath. However, she quickly regained her composure. She refused to believe that anyone within this city would dare touch a hair on her head, not only because of her personal strength, but also because the troops of Gales were stationed here, and Zemon, whose name had spread throughout the world over the last few days, was even in the mansion itself. Ruth gestured and Seraphina nodded, stepping in first and being followed by the young noblewoman a second later. Seeing Ruth beginning to take off her clothes, Seraphina looked around as if to make sure no one was there. This steam is pretty thick, isn't it? She muttered softly and barely audible due to the sound of the cascade of hot water falling into the pool. Ruth let out a low chuckle, and as she untied the string binding both sides of the top of her dress she said softly, Princess Seraphina, this bath is not just any bath. My father often invests a lot of money to buy rank 1 or rank 2 medicinal herbs. An engine is in charge of squeezing their nutrients into the water that falls here so that showering will make the skin of our bodies feel as soft as that of a newborn baby. Seraphina was not shy about bathing with another girl in the same bathroom. She was often helped by her maidservants to undress in the royal castle back to Gales. Just as she finished unbuttoning her magic robe and as she was about to say something regarding Ruth's words, a male voice that shouldn't be there sounded in the middle of the bathroom. Who is it? Seraphina's pupils contracted to the size of needles and her face went white as a sheet at the thought of a man looking at her body. She quickly covered herself and the mana inside her body began to boil as she looked at Ruth with murderous intent, sending chills down the spine of the young woman who was only a few years older than her. The very thought of having her body seen by a male stranger not only made Seraphina feel like vomiting, but she felt an overwhelming measure of anger filling her heart. Zemon had fallen half asleep in the middle of his bath, which was not strange at all since for him this kind of moment was precious as it was one of the few times he could enjoy peace and quiet. However, he quickly awoke and sensed 2 auras, identifying one of them an instant after he asked who it was. Seraphina? Is that you? Seraphina was planning to kill. For the first time in her life, she felt the urge to kill not 1 but 2 humans and was sure she would not be able to restrain herself. However, her murderous intent disappeared as quickly as a speck of dust being swept away by mutant winds when she heard this time better the male voice coming from the pool of warm water in the innermost part of the large bath. You, orc? What are you doing here? She asked in amazement. However, she quickly realized that she was half naked and just as she ducked to cover her body a shrill scream shook the walls. Vermin! This princess shall scratch your eyes out, you pervert. You scoundrel who won't spare even underage girls. Inside the pool, Zemon stood dumbfounded looking at the steam before his eyes after being accused as if he had just raped 20 helpless women. Finally, after 2 or 3 seconds of silence, he finally burst out. Holy shit! What do you mean by saying that this daddy is a pervert? This daddy has rejected the advances of thousands of beauties just to keep himself worthy of the woman he loves. Zemon jumped out of the pool like an angry shark which caused water to splash everywhere. His eyes seemed to look past the steam as he glared at the spot where Seraphina and Ruth stood while shouting his aggravation. Besides, brat, this daddy has no intention of touching a flat-chested girl like you. Let me tell you something, Zemon, have countless flaws, but I definitely don't look at a girl who doesn't even know how to wash her own panties as a woman. Xietain had emptied the air from his lungs to express his anger, so when the last letter left his mouth he was forced to take a deep breath to recover. As he pointed forward, completely naked and only covered by the absurd amount of steam in the room, the sound of water falling from the waterfall was the only thing that could be heard. Ruth was speechless as her eyes darted back and forth between the legendary Xietain who had ended the life of the terrifying Shadow Killer and the princess of the now one of the most powerful kingdoms in the world. Although she could not properly see Xietain due to the distance and mainly the steam, she could imagine his infuriated expression. However, it was when she looked at the expression on Seraphina's face that she realized that something bad might soon happen to this place, so she carefully retreated several steps without making a sound. Wasn't Xietain and the second princess of Gales supposed to be a couple? Ruth was astonished as she realized that next time it would be better not to listen to the words people spoke in the streets. Hearing no reaction from Seraphina for several seconds, Xietain began to worry as he thought that perhaps he was too harsh with his words. However, he soon frowned as he heard what sounded like the buzzing of a mosquito. Did you say something? You. What? Oh you. Xietain frowned and said in a deep voice, Girl, speak louder for God's sake. Then, Lilith's laughter entered Xietan's ears, followed by what were clearly the words of someone who was having a good time watching the show. Daddy Xietain, if I were you I'd start to run. What? He asked subconsciously, out loud. I'll kill you, you shameless bastard. That voice was, definitely not Lilith's voice. When what seemed to be a shriek similar to that of a small wounded beast shook the four walls of the large bathroom, Xietain sensed real danger and subconsciously angled his upper body backwards in a swift and abrupt movement. Lightning flash. A silvery magic circle shone about 30 meters from where Xietain stood, and not even a second after it, the inside of the bathroom was dyed pale white when a rumble shook the ground. Under Xietan's wide-open eyes, a perfectly white lightning flash flew past a couple of centimeters from his abdomen and in the blink of an eye passed beyond him, impacting against the south wall of the room. Outside the mayor's mansion, the citizens had to be held back by several soldiers who had helpless expressions on their faces as they watched the women struggling to find a way to sneak in to meet their idol. Captain, do these young girls think that this Xietain guy is a lamb or something? One of the soldiers wiped the sweat from his forehead as he cursed under his breath, Damn, it seems that the younger ones of our Maeston kingdom don't care that we will soon become just a kingdom under the power of Gales. The captain was a bearded and stout man, a level 49 soul evolver. He watched the expressions of the excited young girls who looked to be even younger than 20 years old as he said with a sigh of resignation, they will soon realize that the rumors about the hero saving the princess are nothing but pure lies. Differences in treatment will soon begin to reveal themselves along with bullying and discrimination for being part of the defeated kingdom. Boom! A thunderous explosion shook the surroundings and the ground trembled for a moment. What happened? The captain of the troops in charge of protecting the mayor's mansion turned abruptly just in time to see one of the walls of the house collapsing in half. Enemy attack? The other soldiers quickly charged toward the scene to assist, and the enthusiastic girls retreated like a tide being carried back into the depths of the ocean. Swoosh! Swoosh! Suddenly, two blurry, unclear silhouettes broke past the encirclement of people at speeds too high for even the level 49 captain to see anything, not to mention the others who were weaker. The sturdy captain felt as if someone had held a sword against his throat as he realized how frightening the two figures were and quickly judged that it was better for him not to get involved in whatever was going on. Not even a minute later, Ruth came out properly dressed but with her hair a mess and completely soaked. Although the corner of her mouth was quivering fiercely as was her left eyelid, she did a good job of reassuring the soldiers and citizens that there was nothing to worry about. Young Miss Ruth, what happened over there? The captain asked, looking up at the collapsed wall. Ruth gave him a sidelong glance before turning her attention in the direction of where the two silhouettes had run. Lovers fight. Seraphina D. Gales, you brat, have you gone fucking crazy? You almost left me without Father's Day, shouted Xietain as he flashed through the trees in a northerly direction. Ha 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 ha. Little princess, be careful where you aim. This big sister still needs to take the final step with this little boy at least once. Hearing Lilith's words and remembering that Seraphina's flash of electricity was inches away from hitting little Xietain's face darkened, and it took everything of himself, as well as the memory that Seraphina was Seraphina, to not turn around to seek revenge. After being attacked with an attack powerful enough to hurt him, Xietain realized that his words had really gotten the little princess of Gales on edge, so he immediately picked up a bathrobe and made a run for it. That's right, he was running through the woods wearing only a bathrobe while being chased by an enraged Seraphina who had buffed herself with multiple skills to push her agility and movement speed to the maximum possible. Xietain had learned one thing during his childhood after watching his mother chase his father around the house with the broomstick every time Xietain did something wrong. When a woman was angry, the best thing a man could do was run away and wait for her head to cool down so he could rationalize with her. Surnamed by, stop. This princess must char your hide and feed you to the orcs in order to feel at ease. Seraphina's voice followed by another explosion caused by a failed magic attack made Xietain really feel like crying, but he had no tears to shed. After several minutes, Xietain was finally losing his patience, and in an attempt to calm the little beast behind him he shouted out loud, Seraphina, wait a minute. Tell me what upset you and I'll apologize. Did it bother you that I called you flat, or maybe it was the fact that I said you don't know how to wash your underwear? Xietain, I must kill you. I must kill you no matter what. Ha 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 ha. You really don't learn. Xietain could practically imagine Seraphina's rabid expression and Lilith's smiling face as he ran for his little life. Soon, however, Xietain realized a fact he had ignored. Shit. He stopped his steps abruptly when he realized that they had inadvertently wandered into the lands of the Xietain kingdom, the kingdom they planned to subdue next. Chapter 828 Red Enemies. After he stopped, Xietain quickly jumped to the side, and only 2 or 3 seconds later an arrow of green light struck the place where he stood before, splitting the earth into thousands of pieces and forming a crater over 20 meters in diameter. He looked back and saw Seraphina approaching quickly as she pointed at him in preparation to activate another skill. Seraphina, stop. We have trespassed into the territory of the Xietain kingdom. His words fell on deaf ears as Seraphina did not hesitate to activate her next skill. Bright Javelin. Seeing the white-colored magic circle exploding and a moment later the white javelin flying towards him, Xietain finally lost his patience completely. Damn it, see if I don't show you who's in charge here. With an extraordinary maneuver and as if his body was made of rubber, Xietain's body moved at an impossible angle while rushing towards Seraphina. The magical javelin brushed his chest, causing part of the robe to shatter, and an instant later he heard several explosions as at least 2 or 3 dozen trees were turned into a pile of broken wood, fragments after being shattered by Seraphina's magic skill. Seraphina seemed to wake up from her anger-induced blindness when she saw Xietain suddenly charge towards her with a serious expression on his face. The difference between the two was very great despite the talent and effort Seraphina had made all her life, not to mention the fact that even in the midst of her rage she had not activated any of her truly destructive or killing skills. Realizing that this time he was actually angry with her, Seraphina tried to apologize. I saw, but it was too late. Ah! Seraphina screamed in fright as the world around her seemed to spin several times before she realized that what was spinning was her and not the world. Before Seraphina could even count to 2, her body found itself in Xietain's lap with her midsection resting on Xietain's thighs and her eyes looking down at the ground. You, what are you planning to do? Seraphina screamed and tried to get free unsuccessfully when Xietain's large hand pressed her back down so that her small strength was of no use. Help! Someone is trying to rape me. Xietain gritted his teeth at Seraphina's words and said, this time really angry, it looks like your parents were too kind to you during your upbringing. Let me help your father teach you what is right and what is wrong. Before Seraphina could say anything else, she felt the air behind her stirring and soon an expression of disbelief covered her pretty face. Pa! The loud sound of a slapping sound rang through the wooded forest. A small sound escaped automatically from Seraphina's mouth as she looked forward in shock. She didn't seem to feel the pain being transmitted from her bottom as she muttered under her breath. Did you spank me? Pa! The answer to her question was a second spanking that finally made her wake up and screamed in pain. Ah! Even my father or mother never spanked me before, how dare you? It seems you still don't understand that not everything is under your control and not everything will be as you expect it to be. Xietain gritted his teeth and struck downward again with his right palm wide open. Pa! Ah! I will kill you. Pa! Apologize. Xietain, I must eat your flesh. Pa! You still won't admit your faults? You! Pa! Today I have to show you the method most used by the adults of my world to teach their children good manners. Xietain ignored Seraphina's threats and continued to spank her, but hard enough to make her feel pain and burning but not to hurt her. Even if Seraphina was proud, her will soon began to break under the humiliation and helplessness of being spanked without being able to do much. Besides, the pain in her backside was starting to become intolerable, so without her realizing it soon her eyes reddened and crystalline tears began to slide down her cheeks. Whoa, orc! I will bite you to death. Hearing Seraphina's sobs, Byzemon's hand stopped mid-swing, and as he looked at the girl unmoving in his lap seemingly surrendered to her fate, he couldn't help but feel guilty. While it was true that Seraphina had been stupidly unreasonable in attacking him in the bath, it was also true that Byzemon was guilty for saying words that might have hurt her pride and feelings while she felt shy due to the fact that she had almost been seen naked. However, he could not simply say sorry. At the end of the day, it was true that she had used magic capable of hurting him and had even caused them both to wander into potential enemy territory. "Seraphina, listen to me carefully," he said in a serious voice and trying to keep his composure. "Whoa." Seraphina's response was more and more tears of aggravation as she remained still in place without struggling to get up, even though Byzemon's hand was no longer pressing her down. She really seemed to have lost all will to fight back or resist. Byzemon took a deep breath and slowly helped her to her feet. He noticed her aggrieved and embarrassed eyes as she brought both hands behind her body in an attempt to cover her spanked bottom. "The attacks you used earlier really could have hurt me and even hurt someone to death if you missed. Besides, don't you think you overreacted a bit? I only made 2 rather mild comments even though you called me a pedophile and even treated me like a rapist," he said, and just thinking about it started to make him angry again. "Isn't it your fault for making fun of my breasts and calling me a child?" shouted Seraphina, and under Byzemon's shocked eyes she threw herself at him. She hugged him tightly, but that was not all. As soon Byzemon felt 2 sets of sharp teeth dig into his shoulder hard. "You really didn't learn anything?" Byzemon opened his eyes in shock and raised his hand to spank her again, this time even harder than before. However, his movement stopped as the power of Seraphina's bite disappeared. At the same time he heard her sobbing softly. "Isn't it your fault for spending so much time with my big sister?" Byzemon frowned, and even though he was quite confident in his hearing thought he had misheard. "Therefore," he asked in confusion, "you mean Ellis?" Seraphina raised her head to look at him with tears still in her eyes and said in a voice full of aggravation, "I'm sorry, I don't have such a big chest like Ellis. I'm sorry, I'm just a little brat." This. Byzemon was surprised at Seraphina's sudden outburst before his heart clenched. "Don't tell me." Byzemon's expression changed slightly at the notion that a certain thought he had just had may be true. Seraphina looked at him in confusion as she saw him put both hands on her shoulders and carefully moved her back so that they could both look more comfortably into each other's eyes. "Seraphina, it doesn't matter if your chest is busty or if it's small, nor do I think it's necessary to compare you with your big sister. At the end of the day, Ellis is a grown woman while you are in full growth phase." He spoke his true thoughts. Seraphina couldn't help but grimace and mutter, "Your words make me feel better but bitter at the same time, you know?" Byzemon decided not to continue with the topic from before. He needed to find a way to send a subtle message to Seraphina first. He tried to act calm as he asked seemingly casually, "By the way, regarding your family's ocular skill, is that true?" It's true. It's called Fade Eyes." Seraphina nodded without hiding anything. Her eyes were still a little teary and her bottom was burning a little from the spanking, but at least she felt more at ease than before. Besides, Seraphina knew she had been perhaps a little too irrational earlier. "I see." Byzemon nodded. After a few moments of hesitation, he slowly said, "It seems Ellis saw my name in pink, or so she said." Seraphina's expression changed slightly to one of anger and frustration, but she quickly regained her composure and said with a snort, "Humph. Who knows, she might be lying after all. If I were you I wouldn't believe her too much." "That's true." Byzemon nodded without thinking too much about it. At the end of the day, his goal was another and not to talk about Ellis. "By the way, what color do you see when you look at me?" he asked seemingly out of pure curiosity. At first, a very slight shade of crimson partially covered the cheeks of the second princess of Gales upon hearing Byzemon's question. However, only a second later, Seraphina gritted her teeth and glared at him angrily as she said in frustration, "Red." "Red?" Byzemon raised an eyebrow in surprise and confusion. "What does red mean?" "Red represents that you will one day be the cause of my death, you shameless orc," Seraphina said with a serious expression on her face as she stared at him. Byzemon blinked as he stared at her dumbfounded, and for a moment his mind went blank as he did not expect that kind of reply. However, he quickly associated Seraphina's anger and words with the previous event, so he finally couldn't help but chuckle. Just then, a message flashed in Byzemon's retina and his expression changed tremendously as he looked at Seraphina with a slight tinge of murderous intent. "God of War's will, 0.5%/65%. 5 enemies within a range of 300 meters had encircled the area." Chapter 829 Apocalypse in the Apocalypse. "You? Why are you looking at me like that?" Seraphina was not only surprised but also startled when her emerald eyes met Byzemon's black eyes. He had looked at her in many ways so far, she had noticed his gratitude in his gaze as well as his care for her. However, this was the first time Seraphina felt and noticed that Xietain was looking at her with murderous intent. The youngest daughter of the King of Gales immediately felt very sad at being looked by him in such a way. At the end of the day, the kind of look she had hoped to ever receive from him was completely opposite to the kind of gaze he was giving her at this moment. On the other hand, Xietain did not immediately respond to Seraphina's question. The thoughts he had at the moment were very simple but at the same time full of complexity that made it difficult for him to make a decision. Had Seraphina betrayed him? Xietain did not want to think of it that way. However, it was hard not to think about it considering that this was too big a coincidence. Eventide world was big, very big. The territory of the Fiera kingdom was as vast as the territory of the Maeston kingdom that he had recently conquered, but just where he ended up after being chased by Seraphina, happened to be the place where 5 enemies seemed to be waiting for him. What made Xietain doubt the most was the fact that these 5 approaching enemies were not normal enemies, they were really powerful soul evolvers. If the incoming enemies were just unclassified or first-order soul evolvers, maybe even second-order soul evolvers, Xietain might not doubt so much as he would simply assume that they had the bad luck to approach the territory of scouts on a mission. However, Xietain doubted with all his heart that 5 soul evolvers above level 100 were casually scouting the area he walked into. Xietain, calm down. Lilith's voice rang in his head and Xietain indeed began to calm down upon hearing her gentleness. I understand your doubts, but I don't think that girl betrayed you. There's something weird about all this, but I don't think someone who looks at you with those eyes would be willing to put you in danger. He took a deep breath and nodded silently, not wanting to believe or think that a person he had come to trust with all his heart would betray him. At the end of the day, Seraphina de Gales had saved his life and had helped him in his greatest time of need since the beginning of the apocalypse. Seraphina, stand behind me, he commanded. Xietain ignored the confusion she felt and in one swift motion drew both his great sword and the epic grade dagger he obtained after killing Shadow Killer. Not even 2 seconds later, 5 figures appeared in front of the duo. Well, looks like we really got lucky this time, said a short, mustachioed man with 2 hammers in his hands and metal-colored plate armor. To think we'd meet the second princess of Gales here, said another middle-aged man, his hair color was bright red as was the slight beard on his face. He held a magic staff and wore a bright crimson robe. Who is the other kid though? A first-order soul evolver? The third middle-aged man frowned as he held the hilt of his still-sheathed sword warily and cautiously. The only woman in the group, a beautiful middle-aged woman with a whip-like sword tied around her waist, looked at Seraphina and then at Xietain for a few seconds before saying in a melodious voice, First-order level 50, wielder of a great sword and next to the second princess of Gales. Looks like we ended up meeting the highly rumored Xietain sooner than we expected. But that's also good since everything will be faster this way. The red-haired man with the magic staff underwent a great change of expression when he heard the woman's words and his bright blue eyes flashed with murderous intent as he looked at Xietain like, Daggers, are you Xietain? It was you who caused my son's death? Xietain looked at the 5 people and even without knowing their identity it was not difficult to identify their status at all purely based on how powerful the auras of their bodies were. He looked coldly at the red-haired man and said indifferently, I have caused the death of many people, among them, there is no shortage of sons of men. Good, good, good. The red-haired man felt an increasingly bright flame of anger begin to burn in his chest. You are the only one who has dared to speak to me in that mocking tone since I sat on the throne of the Thels kingdom. The other person was my father, the former king of Thels. I hear you killed Shadow Killer? Let me prove how much of the rumors are true. Just as the red-haired man, who happened to be the king of one of the 3 parent kingdoms of this world's human race, the middle-aged woman's melodious voice rang out again. Curtis, slow down. That's not what we came all this way for. The king of the Thels kingdom snorted and kept his eyes fixed on Xietain as he said in a cold voice, Eloise, this brat is the only reason why Gales dares to act rampant and that big threat is now standing in front of us wearing a stupid normal bathrobe, completely unprotected without a real combat armor. We even have that old dog Philip's second daughter here. Isn't this a good opportunity? The woman named Eloise looked at the king of the Thels kingdom with a slight frown and said in a slightly heavy voice, Curtis, remember that your son Gerard really joined hands with the demons, a fact that neither you nor anyone else can deny after watching the recording from the other day. You had better behave yourself and not try to cause any more trouble in our race or else I will be forced to think that Crown Prince Gerard was not the only one affiliated with the demon race in your Thels kingdom. The expression of the king of the Thels kingdom changed slightly, and seeing the other 3 men looking at him with some caution and warning in their eyes, he finally snorted and the mana around him calmed down. Even then, his blue eyes stayed focused on Xietain as if he wanted to dismember him with his gaze. Xietain ignored the old man. Glares did not kill, and if they did he would have died years ago. To him, the king of the Thels kingdom was just another idiot in the crowd who underestimated him greatly, because if he believed that just because Xietain was not wearing battle armor he would be easy to defeat, then what awaited him was the biggest surprise of his life and probably the last one he would ever have. Instead, he was more curious about the middle-aged woman. She was not only much more calm and composed, possessing the bearing of a true monarch, but also had the status and strength to dare to speak to one of the three most powerful people in humanity in such a manner. Xietain drew his own conclusions on the matter as he silently awaited the outcome of events while planning various actions to take depending on how things turned out. The middle-aged woman nodded slightly towards Xietain before looking at Seraphina. She smiled slightly and said in a voice that was neither soft nor heavy, "Seraphina, I must say it was a surprise to see your power in the competition of kingdoms. Although I had heard that you were powerful and had a truly amazing class, I am probably no one expected that at such a young age you would actually have so much power. Your talent is truly commendable. I'm sure Helena is proud of you from no matter where she is looking at you, just as Philip probably feels." Seraphina was about to bow respectfully out of habit as the identity of the woman in front of her was usually even above that of her father. However, when she looked at the broad back of the young man a step in front of her, Seraphina remembered that during the short period of time of the last few days many things had changed. Therefore, instead of bowing she moved forward and stopped standing next to Xietain. Her gentle voice was respectful, but there was also a tinge of weight in her words, worthy of a person of high status. "Queen Eloise, I am grateful for your praise, and I am sure my deceased mother would also be proud if she knew that her youngest daughter was praised by the person she admired since her youth. I will be sure to express your goodwill to my royal father when I get back to Gales." Hearing the way Seraphina referred to the woman in front of them, Xietain finally confirmed the conjecture in his heart. Eloise Mayer, Queen of the Pralin Kingdom, one of the three parent kingdoms of the human race in Eventide world and the most powerful queen in the world. Although she was over 600 years old, her appearance made her look like a woman of 40 at most, but the mature charm that surrounded her only served to make her even more tempting in the eyes of men. Queen Eloise was not upset by what in the past would have been considered disrespectful on Seraphina's part, or if she was upset she did not let it show in her expression. She smiled slightly and nodded before finally looking back at Xietain. Eloise observed the young man in front of her carefully, and the more she looked at him, the more surprised she became. Xietan's level was definitely stuck at level 50, she could feel it clearly. However, what surprised the Queen of Pralin was the fact that this person's aura was deep and mysterious. It felt light and weak at times, but the next second heavy and frightening like that of a powerful third-order soul evolver, even though he was clearly only in the first stage. Many times, judging by appearances was wrong. However, Eloise Mayer used Xietan's appearance to correctly judge that the young man in front of her was truly terrifying. How else could a first-order soul evolver reach such an excellent level of physical appearance? Even if the young man in front of her had been born gifted with a very good physical appearance, it would have been impossible to reach this stage without a high level or terrifyingly pure soul power. It seems that Diana wasn't exaggerating, let alone lying about this child. Eloise Mayer thought to herself and subconsciously sighed in her heart. Times of change have come to our world again, but the one who will bring it this time will not be the soul record but a human. An apocalypse in the apocalypse. Chapter 830 Trust, Proposal and Rejection. It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Xietain. My name is Eloise Mayer, mother of Princess Diana, who is currently under custody in Bearcrest City due to being found suspected of betraying the human race through allying with the demon race. Hearing the words of the woman in front of him, Xietain did not show any kind of reaction. However, a flash of surprise shone in his eyes a second later when the 0.5% percentage of his God of War's will skill fell to 0.4% out of nowhere. The effect of the skill God of War's will lasted for a long time and could never go down, only go up when Xietain killed enemies or simply disappear when an enemy upgrade did not occur within the effect time. Therefore, there was only one explanation for what had just happened, and that was that the woman in front of him had probably put all hostility towards him aside. Let's see how it goes for now. Xietain looked at Eloise and said, giving her the same level of respect she gave him, "It is an honor to be able to meet and exchange words with the Queen of the Pralin Kingdom like this. Even though the circumstances under which I met Princess Diana were not particularly pleasant, I can say that Her Majesty did a good job as a mother." As to whether she had done a good job as queen or not, Xietain did not point this out as he believed that the woman in front of him was smart enough to understand his words. Indeed, Eloise's response did not disappoint him. She smiled bitterly and said slowly, I have been guiding Diana since she was 10 years old to become a dignified queen who could carry on the legacy of the Pralin kingdom. She is talented and willing, but she usually hesitates too much when it comes to making decisions. Therefore, I've tried to give her confidence to choose and decide what to do when the situation calls for it. But I didn't expect something like this. The crown princess of the Pralin kingdom had made a huge error in judgment and let herself be seduced by the words of the crown prince Gerard. She stupidly assumed that Gales was a kingdom whose decline had begun with the fall of Queen Helena and the obvious weakening of King Philip. She mistakenly believed that the fall of Gales was only a matter of time, and so she made a tremendously wrong decision in deciding that it was better to annex the royal family of Gales to save the lives of millions of citizens who might fall victim of the demons due to the kingdom's lack of power to protect them. We all make mistakes in this life. From the time we are born until the time we die we go through making mistakes. As long as we learn from our mistakes so as not to make them a second time, our life will not have been a waste. Xietain said calmly before pointing out in depth, however, regardless of whether it is a kid or an adult, every living being capable of reasoning for itself must bear the consequences of its own actions. At the end of the day, the world we live in is not really peaceful even if that is how it appears on the surface. Luoning, Xiangfeng, Wenyun, Wenyan, and definitely many more young kids had suffered a lot with the arrival of the apocalypse on Earth, some more than others, but suffering at the end of the day. They had to adapt and mature faster, learning that each of their actions would have a consequence that they would have to bear. Because they were thrown into hell along with the adults on Earth, children like Luoning and the rest were even more mature than many adults in Eventide world who grew up being protected. The law of cause and effect was a universal law. Every action always had its consequences whether positive or negative. Diana definitely didn't make any deals with demons. Eloise shook her head and sighed. Even if she knew that what Xietain was saying was the truth, Princess Diana was his daughter after all. Xietain naturally knew that Princess Diana had nothing to do with demons. He could deduce it because of her expression and actions when it was revealed that Prince Gerard was under the protection of 2 third-order demons. However, in war anything was valid. If Princess Diana Mayer is or was affiliated with demons in some way or another, our kingdom Gales will naturally take it upon itself to find out. If she is innocent then she will be sent safe and sound back to the Pralin kingdom. Your Majesty need not worry about it, he said with a firm expression. Realizing that at this rate they would get nowhere and noticing the steadily rising anger of the 4 kings of kingdoms beside her, Eloise decided to temporarily put the matter of her daughter aside. At the end of the day, she knew that Diana was well and not at all mistreated as they had their methods of communicating with each other. Xietain, how about joining my Pralin kingdom? Proposed Eloise suddenly. Her allies looked at her in shock and disbelief as they gasped in shock. Eloise, what the hell are you talking about? It wasn't part of the plan at all, snarled the little mustached king with the 2 heavy hammers. Oh? Even Xietain was surprised. He hadn't expected at all that this beautiful and powerful woman would try to lure him to her side, so for a moment he was speechless. As for Serafina, she subconsciously reached out her small right hand and held the bathrobe he wore. Her expression was a mix between anxiety and anger as she looked at Queen Eloise as if she was looking at a thieving cat that was trying to steal her delicious fish that she had caught with great effort. The queen of the Pralin kingdom ignored the expressions and reactions of the others. At the end of the day, even if the goal for which she and the other 4 kingdom kings had come here was different, Eloise was not willing to pass up an opportunity like this. Who knows? She might succeed even if the odds were not too high. Based on your facial features and your name I can say with certainty that you are certainly not a citizen of Gales, am I correct? Xietain nodded silently. There was no need to lie regarding such a thing. In that case, why don't you join Pralin? Eloise proposed with a serious and honest expression. Whatever Philip has promised you in exchange for your help, I will multiply by 3. Besides, whatever your goal is, don't you think it will be easier for you to achieve it if you have the support of a parent kingdom? Although Gales has become great and powerful due to the repeated conquests of the last few days, the power of Pralin is a fully established power in contrast to Gales, who will still need many years to consolidate the newly acquired gains. The expression of 3 of the 4 kings next to Eloise changed slightly for the better upon hearing her words. After all, if Xietain joined the Pralin kingdom the war against Gales would end immediately and they would not suffer any kind of real backlash. However, the expression of the king of the Thels kingdom turned extremely ugly, because if Xietain joined Eloise the power of the Pralin kingdom would immediately skyrocket, and it was not impossible that in the next few years the other 2 parent kingdoms would be swallowed up by Pralin. Serafina's face soon became paler than before and her grip on Xietan's robe grew tighter as the fears in her heart increased. She had heard from Bizeman that his goal was to obtain as much information and resources that could help his world in both the short and long term. Therefore, from a certain point of view, his best option was indeed to join a kingdom with a larger number of high-level powerhouses fully established. Seeing that Bizeman remained silent and did not immediately refuse, a small spark of hope ignited in the heart of the queen of the Pralin kingdom. Eloise gave Seraphina a sidelong glance before turning her focus to Bizeman. I heard that the King of Gales offered the hand of Princess Elis and Princess Seraphina. I don't know if it is true or not, but I am also willing to give you the hand of my daughter Diana if you join us. In terms of beauty, my daughter doesn't lose at all with a fully developed beauty like Elis, and even though her talent is a bit lower compared to the first and second Princess of Gales, I can guarantee you that you will get something much better in return if you team up with Diana. After a moment of silence, Bizeman opened his mouth and slowly said, Your Majesty is not curious about what kind of response Princess Diana will have about it? Diana is a girl who has always said since she was young that she will marry someone worthy. Is there anyone more worthy than you in the younger generation of Eventide world? Eloise pointed out before adding, besides, even if she didn't want to she will have to accept my arrangements as punishment for her stupid and lamentable performance. She'll understand, though I don't think she'll refuse anyway. The more she spoke, the more Eloise felt that her chances of success increased. Hearing this, Bizeman sighed. To Eloise's surprise, however, he shook his head. I am sorry for having to decline your offer, Your Majesty Eloise, he said in a clear voice. A flash of surprise shone in the eyes of the Queen of Pralin and the other four kings. Indeed, what Eloise was offering Bizeman was something that not only any young man would dream of having but even 99.9% of the men in the world would kill to hear. Wealth, honor, beauties, status. He could have it all, everything, just by saying the word I accept, but he truly refused. May I ask why you are so attached to Gales? Eloise asked after a moment of silence. She pointed with a slight frown showing her confusion. I know you arrived in Gales recently. I don't think in that time you have built such a close relationship with the royal family, or have you? In Eloise's eyes, a person as powerful as Bizeman should have practically everything, therefore, approaching him should be tremendously hard. It was hard for her to think of anything Philip de Gales could have used to gain his loyalty like this. It's not about time, it's not about promises either. It's about actions. Bizeman said and for a brief moment gave Seraphina a sidelong glance before continuing, due to certain circumstances, I ended up deep inside the forest of the ancients badly injured, and due to the overload of a skill that grants me great power, I lost consciousness. In that kind of situation, no matter if it's first order or third order, even the strongest could be slaughtered by a mutant beast with enough attack power. A bite to the head or heart would mean game over. Badly injured? Forest of the Ancients? The memory of Eloise and the other four quickly moved to the terrifying explosion that occurred almost 1 month ago, which not only wiped out 1/20th of the mutant forest but also seemed to coincide with the moment when Bizeman appeared before the masses. It was the second princess of the Gales kingdom who found me unconscious and saved my life, taking me to her family's castle and taking care of me even though she didn't know me at all. King Philip, Her Majesty Helena, and the 2 princesses treated me like a friend. None of them tried to take my treasures from me even though my body had several of them and I could have done nothing to protect them. Bizeman sighed and said in a grateful voice, they might have said that when they found me I no longer had anything on me and I could not have done or said anything about it, but all they gave me was kindness. I'm sorry, Your Majesty Eloise, but my alliance with the royal family of the Gales kingdom is unbreakable, because they are the only ones in this world who can give me what is most needed for an alliance. Eloise closed her eyes and sighed. Trust, eh? Trust. Bizeman nodded, completely dismissing the idea of having been betrayed by the girl standing next to him. In this world, I can only trust them and no one else. Other than them, I am alone.